Welcome to the Everymaker. My name is Nick, and today we're getting jiggy with some miter cuts. This is my crosscut sled. I use it all the time to make perfect 90-degree cuts because I don't have a miter saw. It runs along these miter slots in the table saw, moving perfectly parallel with the blade. In order to make a miter sled, I need to start with some table saw runners that will fit nice and snug into those slots, but still allow enough movement for them to slide. I used a piece of scrap hickory since it's a nice hardwood and would stand up to the abuse. I kept adjusting the fence, just grazing that piece of wood with the blade, until I had a perfect fit with no side-to-side movement whatsoever. I cut a few extra pieces so that I would have them the next time I needed to build a sled, but for this project, I just need two. One last cut on the saw and the runners would be the perfect size. This cut making sure that they were just shorter than the depth of the miter slots. Finally, I drilled a few holes to allow the runners to be screwed to the sled. I used a countersink bit to make sure that the heads of the screws would be below the level of the runner. That way they didn't bottom out in that miter slot. On to the body of the sled. I start by making a center point. Using the tape measure at an angle allows me to line up to the nearest hole number and divide by 2, and that's my center point. Sure beats trying to find out what the middle of 30 and 3/16 of an inch is. I extend the center line, then use my speed square to get my 45-degree angles drawn on both sides. Now I have my board marked, ready to go. I left a little bit on either side so that I have some support when I go to cut my miters. That way they will line up and I will have a perfect 45-degree cut right down the middle. I started trimming the board down to size, stopping briefly to adjust the height of the blade. Then I cut a strip to use as the fence. Once I had my miter gauge set to 45 degrees, I cut the strip in half to give me both sides of the fence. Now that all the pieces are cut out, it's time to put it all together. I added a few washers in each slot to raise the runners above the level of the table, making sure that both runners were lined up with the front of the table and the right side up. Then I used a little bit of super glue on both table runners and lined the square edge of the miter board on the fence and carefully lay it down on my runners. Then you just need to weigh it down with something heavy. You can also use cans of paint. The glue is only there to hold temporarily. The real holding power is done with the screws. I used a Sharpie to mark the inside edge of the miter slots so that when I run my miter sled back and forth a few times, it'll leave a black mark anywhere that the runners were rubbing up against the sidewall. Then I used a mini bullnose plane to take off those high spots, but you can also just use sandpaper. In order for the sled to slide smoothly across the table saw, I applied a thick coat of paste wax. After it dried, I buffed it out to give a nice slick surface. To get the fence lined up properly, I first cut a kerf into that board so that I could line up the fence board using my speed square and just overlapping that kerf. I held it down temporarily with super glue, followed by screws once the glue had set. For the second side, I used a square at the front edge of the fence to make sure that second board was placed exactly 90 degrees from the first. It doesn't really matter too much if the first board isn't perfectly 45 degrees from the blade, as long as both sides of the fence are exactly 90 degrees from each other. Then it was time to test. I cut a small piece off the end to use as a stop block. Then I switched sides and cut 45 degrees on the other side. Swapping sides like this makes sure that even if the fences aren't exactly 45 degrees to the blade, they're 90 degrees from each other and will give you perfect miters every single time. I repeat this process for all 4 sides, making sure to reference the same side of the board each time. I slightly misjudged the length of my board and had to go back and trim up all the pieces so they were the same length. But once it was all assembled, I had a perfect square and no gaps. I needed to be able to cut 45-degree angles, and my miter gauge on my saw just was not working for that. So I built this out of just some scrap wood, and it gave me the perfect 45-degree cuts that I need. When I made my little test piece, I got a little bit of a line there from the super glue, but no gaps whatsoever. This came out just fantastic. And I added these little quick toggle clamps to hold the piece flat down up here by the blade. That way you get a nice cut, and also helps keep it from moving around. If you like this, go ahead and hit that like button down below and leave me a comment and let me know what you thought. If you want to see the project that I made this for, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and stick around. And I'll see you guys again real soon.